As always, we have the consent agenda and the general agenda. I will take any items on the consent agenda that anyone would like pulled. That I'll just raise your hand. I do have one, has to do with the sale of the property down on the south side, the rest of the Dale property.
17.
Yeah.
C-17?
C11.
Yeah.
C-11, okay, I'm going to pull C-11.
10 and 12.
C-10, C-12. Any else? I need two more. I might have a straight here.
No, I'm good. Move for approval of the
We
balance.
have a motion to approve the balance, pulling C-10, 11, and 12. Is there a second? If there is, please make the thing on your keypad, please. Can you accept the motion?
How's that?
All right, hang on a minute.
Beat you to it, sorry.
Okay.
The folks out there, we're all computerized now, so we have to wait till. Okay, it's now up. If you would please vote to approve the balance of the consent agenda. And that is approved 4-0, so the consent is approved with 3 exceptions. We will start with C10, if the secretary would read that one.
Item C10, resolution authorizing fee simple acquisition by the North Carolina Department of Transportation relating to the US 421 Business 40 pavement reconstruction bridge replacement and interchange modification project phase 2 pursuant of the North Carolina General Statute 160A-274 located in South Ward.
Mr. McIntosh, you asked this to be approved. Would you
Mr.
like
Burling, can you just give us a brief overview of what's going on here?
Sure. As you well know, the past few months, NCDOT has made offers to the city for some remnant lots and some easements that are needed related to the Business 40 project. What we have today coming is an offer that NCDOT is making for a little bit of fee simple and some easements around the ballpark.
Can you hold 1 second? Can we get that on the map?
Yeah.
Someone do that? Oh, the screen. Get the map on the screen. I don't know who does that in the room. There we go. All right. As you'll see, it's marked the baseball field's there. Business 40, you can barely see. It's kind of off the bottom of the page, and that's the Peters Creek. So if you'll explain it now.
Here's the exit ramp from Business 40 westbound, and there are some easements needed right along this area, and some fee simple and easements needed up here to the end of the city-owned ballpark property here. This is what's referred to as parcel 15. NCDOT originally made us an offer. They had an appraisal done. When they obtained the first appraisal, they did not tell us what the value was, but they said that it was in excess of $1 million. And because it was in excess of $1 million, they were going to have a second appraisal done. So they had a second appraisal done. And some time later, the second appraisal came in at a value of $743,700, significantly lower than the first appraisal. And when they made us the official offer, they chose the higher of the two appraisals to make us an offer of. They didn't average the two or try to negotiate a lower figure, but simply made the higher of the two offers to us. So that's the offer that we're bringing to you today is for the fee simple and easements and improvements. And the actual land, the easements and land, is $840,000 of that total, and the improvements are about $175,000. That's fencing, a couple light posts, and landscaping. The biggest bulk of that $175,000 is landscaping and fencing. So that will have to be replaced by the city, but they're paying us for that. And then included in the proposal is that the proceeds in excess of what would be necessary to replace the improvements would be designated and earmarked for the pedestrian side path at Business 40.
That's the MUP. Okay. My question was, what is the over and above amount? Do we have a ballpark of this gross number 1069750? how much of that will?
Yes,
go to us?
the, of the $1,051,000,
Okay,
175,000 of
Okay.
it will be to replace the improvements. So the difference between that would be about 840,000 would be, would not have to be spent on improvements. That would be the land. Now, that's, there was an actual estimate from a landscaper and a fence builder who actually installed, fence builders who actually installed that. It could vary a little bit, but it should be in the neighborhood of $840,000.
so there's really, actually, it looks like there's very little land that's actually changing hands, where we've got temporary construction easements and utility
is.
easements.
It is, it's a temporary construction easement of .32 acres.
Right.
I believe that's probably in your exhibit there. But the right-of-way is really less than 4/10 of an acre, and again, it's along the edges here.
Right.
And then there's a permanent utility easement of 1/10 of an acre down in this corner there.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Comment?
Matter of record, it's not in the South Ward.
This is Mr. McIntosh's ward. Does it say South Ward?
It does.
If someone would correct that, say the South.
Northwest.
No. What happened to the Southwest? I guess you take it. All right, Northwest. Does it interfere? I know getting off on the exit ramp, there is a retaining wall for the stadium, for the parking lot. Does it get that far up?
It will go right up to that retaining wall along. Temporary construction.
Okay, and then along Peters Creek, does that mess up the sidewalk that goes up that way?
Up here,
Yeah,
that'll be have to be replaced. The
it moved
elevation-
over a little.
There's going to be an elevation change, which is going to require this entire area to be.
Okay. Yeah. Has the baseball folks been made aware of this?
They were on the tour, and they pointed out all of the landscaping that was affected, and so they're aware that this is going to take place. They had some concerns considering during the baseball season of security, but that was addressed by the contractor who's going to be out there to provide temporary fencing during the construction phase, and then we would be responsible for putting the permanent fencing back up after that, since we've been compensated for it.
Yeah, okay. And when is this work going to start?
Well, the Peters Creek Parkway interchange has to be done first. I think that's supposed to first begin in about December.
Okay. All righty. Mr. Montgomery has a comment.
You mentioned that the net proceeds will be set aside for the multi-use path.
Well, this resolution includes a proposal from staff that be put aside for that purpose.
And so in our conversations about the multi-use path, was this original intent in terms of sale of property due to work being done factored into how we would pay for it? Just wondering, was this the original part of the conversation and thought from a staff level?
My understanding is that this is just a suggestion that's been made as a result of this, for this particular ballpark property.
We didn't know that there was going to be this large of amount of payment. And so when we found that out, Mr. Turner and I talked about it. I believe we need $2 or $3 million more for the multi-use path.
Correct.
That we don't have right now. And since that literally runs along the corridor where the multi-use path will be, we thought it was an appropriate use of the funds.
Is there going to be room for the path?
Yeah.
Remember, it's a temporary construction easement, so we'll get it back.
But it'll be, we got 2 years or so before we're going to redo this?
Yeah.
Yes.
It'll be part of the later phase of the.
Yeah, okay. All right. Can I get a motion on C10?
Move for approval.
If you will please mark that on your,
Second.
okay, let's wait for the computer to bring it up. Get the motion. Oh, you did, okay. All right, everybody vote. I'm sorry, mine did not have it marked. All right, that one is approved. We will now go to C11.
Item C11, resolution authorizing the sale of a certain city-owned vacant lot on Grant's Drive under the upset bid procedure.
I had this pulled. This was the land that we had the discussion on at the last council meeting. It was kind of a, do we have a map for this we can put up? if y'all can remember from the meeting, this land is being, and this is the sale of it that we're discussing today. The plan is incorporated to that lot to the right of it, and, you know, we had a discussion about the berm and all that. And at the council meeting, it was held, and Mr. Taylor was going to work on it some more. I have no idea what he is doing, but I do think this resolution needs to be tied to his. You don't want to do one without the other, and I see the developers here. You would not want to buy the land unless you had the deal. So what I was going to suggest is that we move this forward without recommendation, and that we direct the staff to put these next to each other in the vote. And I think this would need to come after
Yes.
the other. So
Yeah.
we can certainly talk about it, but I think that way they'll be tied together and will be dealt with in the correct order.
Okay.
Can
I
I get
made
a
the
motion on
motion.
that? Ms. Burke has made that motion accordingly.
Second.
And the motion is to send this forward without recommendation and for the staff to list this in the agenda immediately after the other item. And do we have a second?
Yeah.
All right, y'all just hold tight.
Before we vote, I
Yes, ma'am.
have a
You
question.
go right ahead.
I would like to get all of our property that city owns, a list of them properties. And where they're located, and get that.
To you folks in the front row, do you understand what we're doing? Okay. And Mr. Taylor is not here, else I'd ask him for an update. Hang on a minute.
We discussed it, he and I discussed this earlier today.
Okay.
That was
This is actually Mr. McIntosh's idea that I took.
Councilmember Clark, I would point out that there is an Exhibit A at your desk that is a letter from the offers that goes into an explanation, it goes into an explanation of their reasoning for the offer that they made. If you would just put that with your materials for next week.
Okay.
All right, if everyone has a copy of that here, if y'all will take that home. I apologize, I did not see that until it was here, but we will take that with us.
Yeah.
All right? Has everybody voted? Okay, that is approved 4-0, so that will be on the general agenda. It'll be next Monday, a week from today. All right, we'll now go to C12.
Item C12, resolution authorizing the sale of certain city-owned property at 4900 Rumley Circle under the upset bid procedure.
And I believe we have Ms. Carmen, is the letter you have related to this?
It's related to G1,
Oh, G1, okay, got the wrong one, I'm sorry.
September agenda, 14.
Yeah, I got the wrong piece of land, okay. If you'll tell us about this one, please.
This is an offer that the city has received for a surplus property located at 4900 Rumley Circle. This is a property that we have had offers on. The balance of the loan totals about $79,500 on this house. When we obtained it last year, we had a professional broker give us an advice on the estimated market value of the property of around 60 to 65,000. We've marketed since that time and have not had any offers over the low 50s until we did receive one offer that was nearly full price of around 63,000, but the owner could not obtain financing due to the appraisal that came in on the property.
The buyer could not obtain financing.
Buyer,
Yeah.
yes. The buyer could not obtain financing. So we continued to market it and then recently received an offer from Palace LLC of an offer of $62,500, and that offer would pay us. We received an approximate offer that would get about 50% back on the loans that we had out on the property, which was our goal. Whereas if we only received 50 or the low 50s, we'd get much less than 50% back on our loans. So that was the reasoning behind this, of trying to get approximately that amount for it. So this is the offer that's coming forward from Palace LLC of an offer of $62,500 cash for the property.
Is the $39,000 loan a city loan?
Yes. And it was also, part of that was paying off a first mortgage. So we would have lost, if we hadn't bid, we would have lost the entire $40,000. But by bidding, we bought out the first, got the second.
Gotcha.
Now, if we can get 20, we'll only lose 20 as opposed to losing 40 if we had not bid on it.
Okay, understand. Questions, comments, Ms. McIntosh, you had this before.
So we had first position on the loan. What program was this loan made under?
I'm not familiar. Perhaps someone from community development might know the particular program.
We'd have to investigate, Councilman McIntosh, but probably the housing rehab program where we had second and then bought out the first in order to secure, make sure that our second was secured.
Okay, so we were not first position, but we jumped in at the courthouse steps so that we could get ours back.
Correct.
Okay, if we could identify what program this was done under and how many more of those we have out. Hundreds. Okay. But this is the first one that I've seen since I've been on council that's come back to us this way, is that not right? Or do we see these more often?
No.
We do occasionally have these.
Okay.
Ms. Adams and Ms. Burke, and then I'll get to the attorney.
Yes.
This is your ward, I believe.
Yeah, it is. Going forward, just as we do in community development, and maybe there was, I would have liked to have seen us to put some kind of visual picture of this house, if you have it. If not, maybe Monday night we could see this. Kind of like the Mayor Pro Tem and the city attorney, city manager, we need to get an idea of where most of these properties are located. I already feel like I know where they're located, but if we're selling real estate, all of a sudden the market is back, and we're glad people are buying them and they're taking the debt off of the city, but I'd like to know what our debt is, because ultimately that debt could affect my communities that we live in, that people are buying up houses that used to be neighborhoods like Cherryview, and I'm sure most of you remember when that development or neighborhood was built. I do. And I don't want it to be that my seniors who live in these communities, and I get the calls, most of us do, they're being held hostage by the people that the property owners or whatever are renting most likely. And they come in now, and our police got more work to do. Our neighborhoods are not safe. You got the shootouts going all day long. I just think now, city attorney, city manager, we might want to take a look at this just later. I mean, I'm concerned because, as we said, we're starting to see the market turn around, and people are jumping at housing stock within the urban core and the African American community.
I'll make a comment after Councilman.
Okay. Ms. Burke, you next.
Yes, I was going to agree with Mr. McIntosh and also Ms. Adams. I would like for us to get the background, because we can have pride ourselves in being able to, these people to own their homes and keep them. But if you start something now, if you let it come, it will destroy a lot of our neighborhoods, and the folks who are there not going anywhere. So I want that background information as well.
All right. Ms. Carmen, would you like to educate us?
Yes, of course, the memo was written in the context of 1405 Addison Avenue, because this question came up in that context, but it does apply to the current situation, the property we're talking about as well.
That's what I thought, yeah.
So if council is interested in basically selling the property with the condition that requires the buyer to live in it, we can do that with this property we're talking about as well. We just need council to make that known, reject this offer, make that finding, and then send the offer back out with the understanding that anyone who bids on the property will have to live in it for a certain period of time, which council will need to determine what that time period is.
It's the buyer here.
The buyer is not here on this house, but is on the other one,
Okay.
on general.
And I also noted in the memo, because I don't know how many residential properties we actually own, but if council is interested, there are some statutes that allow you to develop an affordable housing program, and but you have to have the program in place in order to sell the property under that program. So if you're interested in that, we can look at putting together an affordable housing program whereby these properties are sold, these city-owned residential properties are sold under that program.
Okay.
These are the only two houses that we have in inventory at this time, the two that are on the agenda for today.
Are the only two houses?
only
We have a
two.
lot of vacant land.
We have vacant lots. These are the only two surplus houses we have in inventory.
Okay. Ms. Burke?
Along with that, I feel we need to have, Mr. Page, a list of all of the projects we've had where we have supplemented individuals. When she mentioned Cherry Hill, well, over there on Addison, we have them all through the city, and we have been doing a pretty good job in the people maintaining their homes. But we may need to monitor it a little more carefully, so I want to know everything too.
You're exactly right, Mayor Pro Tem Burke, that we probably make 50 loans a year is a low-ball estimate. And we've been making loans for probably 30 years or more. The only reason that we would get properties such as this one is if the property owner defaulted on their loan, and we had to. So in this case, I think we have two properties that we actually own as a result of loans being defaulted on, but we have hundreds of loans that are currently outstanding that we review on a biannual basis to make sure they're still in compliance. We can get you a list of those as well as a list of the vacant or the properties that the city does own, but we can definitely show you how many loans we currently have and the millions of dollars that are out there in loans.
But, Mr. Page, you agree that we only have two houses that are actually have houses that we have in
I would have to rely on Mr. Bioli, and I think that's
because there's a big difference between a vacant lot and a house. Okay, Ms. Burke. Go ahead.
And also following up with the attorney, for instance, if we have people who want to be homeowners, repeat what you said a few minutes ago.
Okay, a couple of things. We have a local act that we obtained, the city obtained in 2008. And pursuant to that local act, which is attached to your memo, you could, as a sale of city property, particularly residential property, impose a conditional limitation that says that the buyer, the successful buyer, will have to occupy that property for a certain period of time. Council will need to determine how long that period of time will be, but you can impose that as a conditional restriction on the sale of the property. You could do that, and then, as I indicated, if you have multiple properties and you want to use this as an avenue for affordable housing, you could develop an affordable housing program where you put these properties into that program and sell it under that program. And that's mentioned in the memo as well.
I think the council person, we're looking at these areas where we have them and we know where they're located. And I think in order to keep those neighborhoods stable, following up, we need to look at that part of what you are suggesting.
Okay, Mr. McIntosh had a comment, then Mr. Larson.
Montgomery.
Montgomery, what did I just call you? McIntosh?
Well, in
We're
this
both
item,
younger than him.
right. In this matter, my sentiments are similar to the property on Addison, but particularly in terms of whatever the council member in the area wants to do in reference to that is something I support. I would prefer us to have a standard citywide policy on how we dealt with these and not necessarily ward by ward, because some may have a perspective on it rather different than the other. But if we can't come to a consensus on a citywide policy that takes into consideration how we sell these properties to ensure homeowners, to incentivize home ownership or affordability in the properties, I know for myself in the neighborhoods that we see these properties in the East Ward are neighborhoods that neighbors in other communities are not wanting to see more rental properties, and wanting to be able to see how we can incentivize home ownership. And with that, you know, I think it's incumbent upon us to take a look at that, to really put something structured in place so that we don't have different applications of how we deal with these type of properties throughout the community.
Mr. Chairman.
Hang on, Mr. Larson had something to get.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
You want me to go ahead?
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. To follow up, I also thought when we have these individual houses that people are buying, they live on small lots, and we're supposed to, I had asked, to start looking at lots next to them to try to get the homeowners to have a larger lot. And I think that's something we need to try to bring in there as well. Thank you, Mr.
Okay. Two things, I guess. One deals with how we acquired these properties. And it sounds like we're second in line, which we seem to have a lot of loans out throughout the city that are cumulative. But the problem is fail to pay their mortgages. And when they fail on their mortgage, then we have to make a choice as to whether or not we pick up the property or just lose out on our second in line. So the chances are, depending on whether we see more foreclosures of mortgages, will really depend on whether we end up with additional properties or we choose to step in. Second thing is, it appears that, you know, we are subsidizing this house $20,000 or so under this sale. And so then the question is, you know, instead of losing 40,000, we're going to lose 20,000, which means, you know, that the city is in fact subsidizing this project. So my sort of question is then, you know, are we maximizing what we're getting out of this? And I really believe that home ownership is the key issue. There's no question that somebody who actually owns property is invested in this city, rooted into this city, pays taxes, and contributes to the neighborhood and contributes to the city. So if we're going to subsidize something, it seems like we ought to be subsidizing home ownership. You know, I would certainly support a citywide program. I would agree with that. I think we need to be consistent about what we do as we acquire these various properties. So I think what I perceive, however, on these two particular cases is both of them are absentee landlords. Will be absentee landlords in these two cases. Am I wrong? Am I correct in those?
They're both investors.
Yeah, so both of them investors. So we're really at a crossroads here as to whether we want to accept two proposals that are up on the market for sale right now, cash available, liquidate the assets and move on, or whether we are at the point where we are prepared to sit on properties longer to actually then assure that we can get home owners into that property, and knowing that it is probably going to cost the city, regardless, one way or the other, to divest ourselves of these properties.
Yes,
Go ahead.
when we first started with this project, heard Mr. Page say about 30 years ago, we were doing our very best to have home ownership so people could take pride. And in these neighborhoods, ownership means that I take care and we have less crime, less property. Now, if we're going to take these properties and start them to be landlords, it's going to create some problems, because no matter how conscientious a landlord is, when they rent to a person, that person does not always bring that same culture that they see there, and they start destroying the neighborhoods. And the other question I want to ask someone to give to me, Mr. Page, when you go back, I want to see the houses that the city has developed. Then I want to see the houses Habitat has developed, because they've done they own a whole lot too, and they've helped us a great deal too with this home ownership. But I think that would help me better just get a good picture of what we're talking about.
Mrs. Attorney, how quickly can you develop a policy, a city policy on this? I think Mr. Montgomery's got a valid point. If we're going to have a policy, I think it ought to be a kind of a set policy, as opposed to doing it helter-skelter.
Can you give me to the end of the year, to the December meeting, to get it to you? And you can reject these offers. You don't have to accept the offers. You can reject these offers if you want to hold the properties for this program. But I can try to get you to in December.
Okay, let me ask the council, and the two boards in question are you two folks. Ms. Adams, let me offer a few comments from the chair, then I'm going to ask them their opinion. I certainly understand the concept of home ownership. I'm a strong believer in it. My concern is these homes are empty, and every day a house is empty, it depreciates. There's no air conditioner or heating in it. I guess we try to keep it heated to a minimal level, but you can have, with no air conditioning, the wallpaper starts to fall off. Just houses need constant care. And my concern is, and I don't know about the other one, and we're just talking about this one right now, we'll get to the other one in a minute. To Mr. Larson, we're getting market value. The tax value is 58, the appraisal is 60, we're getting 62. What we paid for it has nothing to do with what it's worth. And the fact that we had to buy out the first, I'm not surprised we're losing money. The question is, at what point do you cut your losses? I have no trouble with a home ownership policy. My concern is that we better come up with one that works. If not, these houses are going to sit there and just literally rot away. in which case you will never get anyone to buy them for any reason. And that's just my concern. Ms. Adams, this is in yours. Do you have a suggestion?
I would look to the city attorney to help us with this. Again, I know you understand our intent, Councilman Montgomery and my own, and as well as the Mayor Pro Tem. I saw within the body of it that, the buyer had agreed to certain provisions in the purchase contract. But again, my concern is we need to be consistent. And even though if we bid it or said, okay, we'll take this offer, we all know what still could happen in that neighborhood. I need to drive through that neighborhood. I'm going to recommend that we move this to council without any action, because I need to go through the neighborhood and I need to knock on a couple of doors between now and Monday on that street, which is not far from me, and find out how they feel about this house, and what's coming, because they probably don't even know. But I do know there are a lot of seniors in that neighborhood and people that are retired as teachers from rentals and others. And for me, it wouldn't be fair for me to vote on this.
Ms. Carmen?
One thing you can do in the short term, you have the program, and you can use the statute to develop a program, but you also have your local act where you can place a condition on the sale of the property that whoever buys the property has to occupy the property for a certain time period. So you can use your local act for these two single pieces of property and still come up with a program later on which includes other properties. If you're worried about it sitting there for too long and potentially being vandalized, you can still use your local act to deal with them one by one. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but we're going to deal with both of them here tonight, and what I may suggest is we just hold off on this one until we discuss the other one as well. But if we can go back to the potential buyer, but I think they're going to confirm that they're buying it for investment property.
I think it's an LLC, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it is.
It is.
Out of King.
It is out of King.
So I have a feeling that will kill the sale. We could put the condition on it. But I think we need to come up with a policy that says that if we repossess a house, that if we sell it, then the owner has to live in it X number of years, 2, 5, whatever it may be, before they can rent it. And that's the policy I'm wondering how quickly we can come up with. I think if we put a condition, I don't know what's going to happen with the next one, but my guess is if we put a condition on either one about living in it, that it could well, on this one, it would certainly kill the deal. And the other one, I don't know.
Well, I did speak with the owner of the other one, and I probably would.
Yeah, okay. So, to Ms. Adams, do we want to send this forward with that recommendation to ask the council, not the council, the council, different spelling, to come up with a recommendation for some type of language to put into it as far as occupants?
Yes.
Can you have something by Monday night?
I can have
Got all
condition by Monday night,
yeah. Okay, you got weekend.
I can have a condition by Monday night. I can't have a program by Monday night.
Okay, I'm hearing we're going to send this forward without recommendation to the council and direct the city attorney to come up with a couple sentences that would place some type of home ownership restriction, and I would guess somewhere between 2 and 5 years. I think it's about all
You
you
all
can
tell
ask.
me what you'd like to say. I was thinking 5. Is 5 long enough?
5's typical.
Yeah,
for purposes
5 be
like-
fine. And then that will be added to it on Monday night if Ms. Adams wants it. Okay, can I get yes, Mr. Larson?
Could I just ask an academic question, and that is, would we allow something like a rent-to-own program under an investor buying the property but selling it under a rent-to-own option instead of a straight rental? I don't know. This is something for real estate people to talk about. I'm trying to think about, if you want to have investors, but people can't come up with front-end mortgage loans and whatever, if there's a way to create a different mechanism of financing that would allow people to get into houses but eventually own them. I don't know. I'm grappling here for us.
I would suggest to council when we work on this to talk with Mr. Page. It may be a way for us to sell it only to someone who will agree to live in it for 5 years, but we would offer some type of finance.
Like the first time home buyers program.
Yeah. So, but we could incorporate that information into anyone that has an interest in it. Mr. Montgomery, you've had your hand.
I have one. Mr. McIntosh has one too, but I think he had his hand first.
Okay, get y'all confused. Go ahead.
There's an awful lot of stuff around a policy, and we're getting ready, we're having a housing study done. I think it would be a mistake to come up with policy before we have information back on it. I think we need a policy. But we got to be really careful about what kind of restrictions we place. I've been in a situation where I have been restricted of selling a house only to a new homeowner, and it would have sold for more money and have been a great place for people to rent. There's a structural change going on in home ownership. Not as many people are buying. You know, renters are not necessarily a bad thing, and for a lot of people, it's the only resource, it's the only way they can be in a house. They can't buy. So I think we need to be careful about what restrictions we place. And one thing that the requirement that if you do historic tax credits is that the investor has to hold the property for 5 years before he can sell it. Now, maybe some sort of a structure like that where it can be held for no longer than 5 years, so you can only own it as a rental, and then you would have to sell it. We have to be real careful about unintended consequences, because our motivation can be great, and we can end up really saddling neighborhoods with property that they don't want to see. Mr. Montgomery?
Well, I was going to say first on that, I think some of the details and nuances of a policy, I think, are something that the Community Development Housing General Government Committee can attempt to work through and hash out specifics in reference to it, what something could look like. And I don't totally disagree with Councilman McIntosh's thoughts in reference to being careful in the process, but that concept is more problematic in a neighborhood that doesn't already have 80% rental housing units in it. When you have a neighborhood that has 80% of the units in it are already rental, and you're adding more to that does more to destabilize the neighborhood than to stabilize it. You go in a neighborhood that has 80% home ownership and 20% rental, that's a different balance in terms of what you look at. And so I think potentially those are some of the nuances that may have to be looked at in terms of some of the things we look at from a policy standpoint on what we do. And even more intentionally in terms of from an affordable housing standpoint and in a home ownership standpoint, if it is our intention long term to preserve those things, policies that have been developed and that are used in other parts of the state, that have been taught in the UNC School of Government's community development programs, speak to the sense that these are long-term deed restrictions that speak to owner after owner, certain things that have to happen. And if a person wants to move beyond those restrictions, then any of the subsidy that the city has put in beyond a certain time, they have to pay the city back. So if after 5 years you want it to be an investment property, any subsidy that the city has put into the property after that 5-year period of time, then you have to pay the city back that in order to get out of those type of restrictions. And I think those are the kind of things that we have to speak to in more specific, because the concern of affordable housing, the concern of being able to get in affordable home ownership is not a problem that is going to go away, but it's a problem that's going to increase. So we can't look at it in the short term, but have to look at it in the long-term issue as a community.
Yes, Ms. Burke.
We had a house, was that on 14th? What house was that right off of Patterson? Which street was that, Mr. 14th. And it ended up being a what?
That's correct.
Home ownership, but we had meetings, but the neighborhood people did not want it to be for an investor home. So in working with them, we finally got a owner. But it took some time.
Okay, Ms. Adams, this is your property. What would you like to do?
So do we need a motion for that?
We need a motion for something. I'm not sure what it is.
As I understood the conversation, I believe the motion would be to move it
Move
forward
it to council.
without a recommendation, and for me to prepare a condition for home ownership for consideration on my.
It sounds like what I said. You can move that?
Yes.
We move this. Is there a
In
second?
a different language.
All right.
Did he second?
We have a second?
Yes, second.
While we're waiting on, I would just like to echo what I said earlier and what Mr. McIntosh just says. I am very concerned that many restrictions, this property will sit empty. And again, every day it sits empty, it will deteriorate more and more and more. If a window gets broken out and the rain blows in, suddenly you got a buckled floor. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And that's why houses do better when someone's living in there. But I also recognize that the more home ownership you have in the neighborhood, the better. So we have a motion Have we voted on it?
Mhm.
Did it come up?
No.
We've seen yes.
Hang on a minute. It's done. Did everybody vote for it?
Yes.
Good. All right, that's done.
Man, you're doing a great job.
How am I doing here?
Great
Not,
job.
not too well.
Must be a Monday.
It is.
All right, that is all the consent agenda. We will now go, and I know there's some folks here from the Addison property, so we've kind of talked around you, but now yours is up, and if the secretary will please read this one.
Item G1, resolution authorizing the sale of certain city-owned property at 1405 Addison Avenue under the updated procedure.
To refresh everyone's memory, and we just went over this, this was held from the, oh, by the way, I have no trouble if the general government and housing wants to take over that policy issue, because that really is more in their bag. Anyway, the current one is the same situation. Someone has made an offer on the house. It would be for investment purposes. The tax value is $33,900. The offer is roughly 15,000 higher than that at 49,000. Am I reading that right? 49 from 33 is, 16,000. And Mr. Montgomery had an issue last time with it being rental versus home ownership, and that's why the city attorney prepared this document that has been referred to in the previous case. So with that, I do know that the potential buyer is here. Reverend Humphrey, would you like to come up and speak? You're entitled, and if you will please come to the microphone. You can get on TV that way. And if you will please give your name and address for the record, we'd appreciate it.
I am Benjamin Franklin Humphrey Jr.
And your address.
Our address is 123 North Woods Circle, Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Sir, I would like to address you on this wise to Mayor Jones, City Council, and the powers that be, in reference to becoming owners of 1405 Addison Avenue property in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, zip code 27105. I would like to say that God forbid that anyone, layman or clergy, seek to hinder or block us from becoming the rightful owners of this property, said property. Our deposit is in place in the amount of $2,450 at this time. We have a contract, bona fide contract, which I have here in hand, signed by the city manager, Lee D. Garrett, as of the date, September 1, 2017. I have in my holding council check. I have the proof of the pudding from this bank, PNC, saying that this check of $2,450 has been cashed. If we had any idea whatsoever that we were going to be running into a problem because we are not going to live in the property. We are owners, and we have been paying tax in Winston-Salem since 1987. I've pastored 2 churches here, Union Bethel and St. James African Methodist Episcopal Church, 1501 North Patterson Avenue. We are builders and not destroyers. We are investors, and I think that speaks for itself. We already have purchased one house at 4545 Oak Ridge Drive in this city several years back, and there's been no problem with that. And so we are both in our 80s. Mrs. Pearlie Humphrey, my wife, and I are in our 80s. We don't want to stand on the corner somewhere and say, help me please. That's not who we are. We are the head and not the tail. And I would hope that you would find in your heart of hearts to say yes when you vote, and in the light of our becoming owners, rightful owners of the property. We will assure you, God being our helper, that the property will be blessed, the city will be blessed, and we will go forward and not backwards if we can get your vote for our becoming the rightful owners of the property. I have in my holding a contract of 13 pages, bona fide contract, 13 pages, signed by Mr. Garrity at this point in time. Thank you very kindly.
Thank you, sir. I asked the city attorney a question. If he were to sign that contract, would it be a legally binding agreement?
Contract, Chairman, contains a provision that says this offer to purchase and contract is subject to the provisions of NCGS 168-269, an upset bid procedure, and it's not binding against the city of Winston-Salem until the Winston-Salem City Council passes a resolution accepting the offer to purchase and authorizing execution of this contract and the upset bid procedure required by statute is complete.
Thank you. Reverend Humphrey, what she has read, and by the way, I'm not an attorney. She is one of a very few attorneys in the room, but she is one. What she's saying, there is language in that contract that says it's only binding after we approve it.
I see.
And if we don't, you would certainly get your money back, by the way, so you don't need to worry about that. With that, I am now going to turn to the councilman, who it is his ward, to get his update on what your current thinking is.
Well, I'd just say ditto to the comments that I made in reference to the item that was in the North Ward. It is not in any regard against Reverend Humphrey or to Mr. Cooper, who I think is the agent, in reference to who both I have great amount of esteem and respect for. It's the principal sense of what is the intention on the properties when we put them back out. If I'd known this property was going out for sale prior to, it would have been something that I would have stepped up for. There's another property that I found online a couple years ago that we were selling. I emailed the city manager and said, hey, this is probably we need to pull back because of its location. And so I think that it's pretty much where we are and where we're going to stand as a city on the policy, not in reference to the people who were looking to invest. It could be great folks who are investing, but if that's not the direction that we want to go in, then I think then we have to stand by that. And for me, when it comes to this neighborhood and this community, if you drive down Addison today, you'll drive past that property. On your right-hand side, after you pass a vacant lot and some trees, you'll find a house that has half of the roof that's burned out of it. You go a little bit further down from that, on the left-hand side, you'll find a blue house that has been boarded up and that probably should be on the demolition list, next to 2 additional vacant lots before you go up the hill again and then come into some other challenging areas there. And with that, I don't believe that putting another rental property in the neighborhood is in the best interest of the community that it resides in, regardless of who owns it. Again, it can be great, respectable individuals, but the question is, what do we want to incentivize? And to me, I've been consistent in saying that I think we should look at home ownership.
So what would you like us, because you're not on the committee.
You can take the same action that you did with the last item.
And that is to move it forward without recommendation, with directions to the city attorney to come up with some language concerning home ownership requirements. Okay. Are you going to move that?
Which in essence, just so we're clear, would likely...
Understand.
Yeah. I'm saying just for Reverend Humphreys to understand what the impact of that would be.
Reverend Humphreys, I'll have the city attorney call you to explain this in detail to you. That's okay?
I'll be happy to. We spoke twice today, but I'll be happy to.
Okay, all right.
Because what I don't want is to misunderstand that this moving forward means everything's going to...
Well, it means it has a different restriction on it. Yes, ma'am.
What you're basically saying is that you want me to prepare a condition that will limit the sale of this property to buyers who will occupy the property for 5 years.
Yes, ma'am.
So unless Mr. Humphrey and his wife are prepared to do that, then it's likely that they will not be the successful.
Understand that.
I'm just trying to make
Yeah,
sure he understands.
and the councilman on.
So in essence, you're gonna end up rejecting his bid and putting a condition on the sale of it for future folks to bid on.
Well, yes, probably.
'Cause he-
That's up to him to reject it, not me.
Well, it's up to council to reject it. You ask him whether or not he's willing to occupy, he says no. If you have a restriction or condition that requires it, then in essence, you're rejecting his bid.
Oh, I understand, yes. Do we have a motion?
I move.
Do we have a second? Ms. Berkeley, you gonna second that?
Pastor, this is nothing against you. I represent you. You live in my ward, but I'm gonna second the motion.
Okay.
And I'm gonna second.
I would just say, and I normally defer to the council members of the ward, and I will in this case, but what you just described is a street in which there's two houses that need to be torn down and two vacant lots, and 4 vacant lots, and I guess I'd say beggars can't be choosy, maybe. We got a street that's got major issues, and we got somebody that's willing to buy a house and keep it up and rent it. I just think you're going to have a hard... How long have we owned this house? Anybody know?
We've owned it a long, long time. When
How
it
long
first
have we owned this
started.
house?
16.
Year and a half.
We
Year
don't
and a
know
half,
how
okay.
long we owned it, but it was somebody else when we first put that house there. Who was the original? What plan was that in, Mr.?
Bring it up for a vote.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been moved in second. There we go. We're now going to vote on it.
Before we vote, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am. You go right ahead.
Mr. Page, can you tell me, if you can't now, maybe Monday, before we owned that house, what plan was that house in? I believe I know how we did that, but that was that Habitat House or whose house? It was a Habitat. Okay. It was Habitat, Mr. Cooper said.
Okay, there's a motion and a second, and we now should vote.
I said, but I'm just abstaining.
That's fine. I'm waiting. There we go. We have 2 in favor, 1 opposed, and 1 abstaining, and therefore it will be on the agenda Monday night. And the city attorney, y'all can chat to let you know what's going on here. I will say I have voted for both these motions. I'm waiting Monday night to see what the language is. I do have concerns with the restriction of 5 years that these houses will sit forever and rot away.
I'll try to send it out via email before Monday night.
All right, okay, thank you. That one is worked.
May I
Yes,
say
ma'am.
something?
But listen,
We are using a different approach with our community development. We have a chairman and a committee who's working very aggressively to try to get some of these things that we see beyond where they are today. For instance, that area that he mentioned, it's a quiet block, even though you have that rundown house and you have that. And I was hoping once you cleared out those 2 houses, it would make it for a better neighborhood. From 14th Street and Delabrook on down, that's a quiet block in front of one of our recreation centers. So I believe with the work that your committee would be doing, it's going to enhance, not take away.
okay, we'll now go to G2, and Mr. Huff is here. Would you give us a brief presentation on this?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, Mayor Pro Tem, members of the committee, in 2007, the council directed staff to pursue FEMA flood-ravaged property grants as a part of our assistance to the citizens that have flood-ravaged property. What you have in front of you is a resolution requesting authorization for a FEMA grant in the amount of $238,242.83 for a property at 2860 Marguerite Park Drive. Basically, the essence of this work is to acquire this flood-ravaged property, demo the property, place deeded restrictions on the property, and then it would be held by the city in perpetuity. We would own it, operate it, and maintain it. These grants come to us on occasion from FEMA when funding is available. Funding was declared last fall, and we applied on the citizen's behalf. And the FEMA said that the citizen met the cost-benefit requirements for obtaining 100% coverage, so this would be to accept that grant from FEMA.
This is in my ward, and I believe the house to the right of this, we've already purchased through this program. Is that
Yes,
correct?
Mr. Chairman, you're correct.
I would recommend to the staff that we look, assuming we approve this, that we look at both those houses and any other land that is ours. I'm not sure what we're going to do with it, but you can't build anything on it, so I guess it would make a little neighborhood park or something, but take a look at it. Ms. Burke?
Yes, since we have quite a few areas maybe similar to this, I want a list of areas that we have, because we've had people with houses down into the to these branches and these places where water, so I need to know that too. And I think it's good if we can get a grant. I don't go against us getting grants, whatever we can get to help us. It's a positive.
I agree with the Mayor Pro Tem. I don't have a problem with people getting grants from FEMA and us doing what we do. But again, it goes back to what I was saying a few months ago or last year. If we don't understand to what, the responsibility of this city, which sits on tributaries and creeks and streams, it was founded that way for a reason, for agriculture. But now we're in a situation where all of these creeks and streams that people built near or development or whatever, and they thought it was great at the time, due to whether you want to call it global warming or anything else you want to call it, we're now sitting in a new situation to remedy or deal with this. Now, if they got the grants on Marguerite, and don't get me wrong, I don't understand how all that went, but if they got the grant, does that mean that other citizens do that? Were they aware, and was this so that other people could have gotten same grant or like to it? And how did we advertise it to the citizens who we're now seeing in droves coming to us about their properties?
Yeah, Councilmember Adams, the way this is determined for FEMA to render this kind of grant is, number one, the citizen has to live in a FEMA flood zone. So they have to live in that flood zone. They have to have a FEMA flood insurance policy, and then they have to have filed a number of claims against that policy to where the cost benefit is reasonable for FEMA to render grant funding for that. And that list is fairly small within the city limits. It's only a couple of folks, and as Chairman mentioned, the one next door to it was the last grant that met those strict qualifications that FEMA has. So,
can you get a list for the council of all the houses that are potentially, or that on that list?
yes.
And I guess my other thing is then, I know we do what we do based on the law, but the system is rigged so that poor people can't benefit from this, because most of us don't have those insurance policies that FEMA covers everything, including like my house where the water comes down and, So I agree with the chair here. I would be interested to see what other houses have gotten assistance from FEMA, and based on wards or neighborhood demographics, to see how many neighborhoods within the African American urban core have also gotten likewise. This is like, and I'm not calling these folk out, but it's like if I'm rich and my house is being flooded, then I got the right stuff in place so I can get out. I can get out and get my money, and other people can't do this. So at least also put to me in a simplified bullet point, explain to me how FEMA does this, because when I get where I'm going, we're going to come back and look at this, because this sounds gentrified to me, but okay, I'm done.
Ms. Turk?
Yes, the house that was in the paper about not quite a year ago, where that house was just flooded, about to go down, it belonged to a Kimbrough family.
Viola Kimbrough.
Yeah, do you remember that?
I do.
How would they have applied for something like that?
I'm not sure what property we're talking about.
It's in the, what ward was it in?
Dan Bessie?
It's in Bessie.
Cedar Post, okay. Mayor Pro Tem, I'm with you now. I apologize. Yeah, for Cedar Post and the Kimbrough property, they had a large sinkhole from a storm drain, privately owned storm drain that was in the back of their property. That would not have been eligible for this FEMA assistance, because we're talking about riverine flooding here in a major watershed by a big tributary here, and not really upland flooding, which is the case with Cedar Post. So they would not have been eligible for this type of
The councilwoman brings up a very important point, and people who know how to do it and some may not know. Now, Crawford, remember on Crawford over there in Skyland Park?
Yep.
Were they sitting in something like that too?
Skyland Park.
Off
Kennard, yes.
Yeah.
Two of our grants for Mr. Anderson and Mr. Wallace Huron were at the 500 block of Kennard. So they did receive or were eligible for this funding. But with a lot of property owners, delivery of clear title is a problem. So that's one of the factors that involves these grants. But they were eligible and did receive funding, or were eligible for it, I should say.
Thank you. I've always said we need to be fair across the whole city, Mr. City Manager.
Yes, ma'am.
And if there will, to follow with the councilwoman's observation, there are some people who know more how to do it.
Yeah.
And then if we have citizens with the same need, then we have a legal office here. And our legal office ought to just, if it's step by step, to help them to understand the law. And I think this also, whatever you need to qualify for that, it needs to be, Mr. Chairman, publicly, that everybody can understand what you need to qualify. You need to have something on TV 13 to talk a bit about it.
So, Mr. Huff, unrelated to this, we would like a list of those that we have done in the past, maybe a list, and then a list of those that are in the process or have gone through it maybe for some reason, and then ones that potential might be. And I will say for the record, this is the third one in the West Ward, and the first one I did was for an African-American lady way out on, she backed up to South Creek. What I think FEMA does, and I've seen things in the news lately because FEMA's got a lot going on between Texas and Puerto Rico and Florida and everywhere else, is they simply do a bottom line. Okay, someone's got flood insurance, they get flooded every year, and we have to write a check so much every year. It'd be easier just to buy it out. And I think FEMA does kind of a cost-benefit analysis. So maybe some information on that particular.
That's exactly right.
Okay, Mr. Larson.
I think there's two things going on here. One is, are there houses in the floodplain and that we don't know about or should know about or be concerned about? Second thing is, do those homeowners have FEMA flood insurance? If they don't have FEMA flood insurance, what I'm hearing is they don't qualify for these grants.
For most of the grants, you
So
have to have
if the break point is we have homeowners that are in floodplains that can't afford FEMA flood insurance, then they're disqualified from even talking about this. So there's the problem, as far as I can see, that we're going to have. So I don't know how many houses or homes we have in floodplains in the city. I don't know how many houses we have that are in floodplains that they're paying FEMA flood insurance and have a record with FEMA that would qualify them to have their houses bought out and destroyed. But it seems to me that somewhere, if we're going to look at this problem, we ought to look at it comprehensively so that it does not appear, that certain people get benefits and certain other people don't get benefits, or we have geographical issues or what have you.
And it might be good if we find out what flood insurance costs. I've never thought.
Exactly.
Mr. McIntosh?
One of the sort of self-regulating things going forward is that lenders now are the stop on much of this occurring as we go forward. If you're buying a house, you have to have certified that you're in a floodplain or not. And lenders make it prohibitively expensive to move into the house even if you want to buy insurance. So it becomes more difficult going forward to buy a house that's in a floodplain. And that's, I think, a concerted effort at the federal level to not get into this position. But as with many things with stormwater, this has been sort of an emerging concept over the last 10 or 15 years. And so properties that were built in the 90s, this was built in 96, there wasn't that sort of same conceptual issue or risk. And now that it's being recognized, there is an attempt to throttle that risk going forward.
Okay. We have the immediate issue, which we'll deal with in a minute. Then we have a broader issue. We've asked for some information to come back, and that can certainly be, Mr. Huff, whenever you get it all together. This is going to take you long. can I get a motion on the current one, which is to approve the federal grant for this one? We have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Everybody just wait a minute. This will come up in a minute. Everybody please vote. That is approved 4-0. Thank you very much. We will now go to, before we go to G3, which is next one, G4, Ben, were you going to do that?
Ms. Tony was going to present that.
I see you. Ms. Tony, we may not make it to you, so I don't know how long the next one's going to make, but I will try to do my best to be finished at 6. If not, we'll please continue that to the next meeting. We will now go to G3, if the Secretary would read that one.
Item G3, consideration of items regarding a resolution accepting a 2016 staffing for adequate fire and emergency response grant and authorizing the associated fiscal year 2017-2018 local funding commitment. Item continued from the September 2017 Finance and Public Safety Committee.
Okay, it was just mentioned, this was at the last meeting, we continued, and I believe that, did Public Safety also look at this?
Yes.
And I think
Briefly.
and they deferred it as well.
Yeah.
So we're kind of in the same position. Chief, will you please come up and, excuse me, if you'll refresh everyone's memory on what we have here and what I think was additional information requested, if you would like to go over that as well.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem, other members of the committee and council.
Good afternoon.
So this is a request for local match funding for staffing for adequate fire and emergency response. This is a FEMA grant for 15 firefighters over a 3-year period of performance, and the intent of the grant is to assist career fire departments with increasing their compliance with the National Fire Protection Association 1710 standard, which recommends that 15 firefighters arrive on the scene of what's defined as a moderate risk house fire within 8 minutes traveling. And as you mentioned, you all did ask for some additional information. We presented that for you. It's included in your agenda packet.
You want to go over that?
Yes, sir. And I'll go over it in as much detail as you want. There are, so I assume you're looking at it in your agenda packet. I'm looking up here, and we have it on the monitors for everybody else to see. So you all, again, asked for some follow-up information. A lot of that was kind of comparison information between what we are doing and what some of our peers are doing. And I think the most compelling, and again, I'll go in this in more detail if you'd like, but I think there are 3 graphs in here that are most compelling in my mind. And one is chart 4, which is on page...
Ours is page 3.
Okay, thank you. So chart 4 on page 3, which shows our firefighters per square mile relative to our peers. So if you then back up to chart 2, you can see the result of that. So if you give us a chunk of real estate to cover, and we have fewer people covering that chunk of real estate, that presents itself in it taking us longer to deliver those 15 personnel than our peers. And if you look at chart 2, you can see us all the way up, Winston-Salem's all the way on the right in our current position. We are taking longer to deliver 15 firefighters than the peers who are included here, Greensboro, High Point, Charlotte, and Durham. And we're taking twice as long as Greensboro is taking. So, and then
Chief, can I ask you a question
yes,
here?
Sir.
On chart 2, what's the assumption about how many trucks are at the scene at this point?
Well, so it depends. So none of these departments have an effective response force of 15. There's something greater than that, and it varies depending on jurisdiction. But what we asked our peers to do was tell us, and these are all, the reason we use these agencies is because they are all accredited, and with the exception of Charlotte, they're all relative to our size. Take Raleigh, for example. They're not accredited. They can't provide this information very efficiently. So what we asked them to do is look in your records management system and tell us at the 90th percentile when your 15th firefighter arrives. So for us, if engines were delivering that effective, those 15 people, it would be 5 engines. For Greensboro, it would be 4 engines.
Okay, that was my point. That was my question.
But hang on, Mr. Montgomery had a question, comment.
Well, and again, I'm wondering the backdrop of the data kind of similar to Councilman McIntosh, because looking at Charlotte with more, if you look at chart 4 and then looking at chart 2, the question that even goes into this for me is the question of then what is the impact from a geographical standpoint? Does geography make a difference in what we're looking at? Because if you see Greensboro on the other chart there that has a 5-minute response time when Greensboro on this list is at 3.9, and where we see Charlotte, how those things make a difference in what we're seeing on chart 2, and the positioning of those stations within the city themselves.
Okay, so two things affect delivery of the effective response force. How far you have to go to get there, and then when those units start showing up, how many people do you have on those units? So for us, relative to our peers, we generally have to go farther, and when we get there, we have fewer people. So take Charlotte, for example. They run minimum 4-person staffing on everything. So as their units are arriving, there are 4 people showing up. As our units are arriving, there are 3 people showing up most of the time. We have a few units that are minimally staffed with 4, but not the entire city like Charlotte does.
Yeah, and I understand that, but what I was saying, like, if in Greensboro, and this is not the case, in Greensboro, if every fire station was at the intersection of Business 40, you could travel a longer distance in a shorter period of time. So I'm just wondering, when we look at those, how much that actually impacts the number of people getting to a location at a time. And that may not be something that you can get there, but when I look at this, those are the kind of things that I ask myself.
Can I beg your indulgence? Ask me the question again, because I'm not sure I'm picking up what you're putting down.
So we're looking at the time on number 2. Anybody make this?
No, you keep going.
Okay.
Keep going.
On chart
I'm
number.
confused too, but keep going.
On chart number 2.
Okay.
Go to chart 2, and we see the time.
Yes, sir.
And you're looking at the time there. What I'm inquiring is around the not just talking about the number of people. Yes, we see the number of people that get there, but the time that they get there, how their geographic position makes a difference in these numbers. So where they're actually located and coming from impacting them getting to their destination. If they're located at intersections of highways, 52, Business 40, their ability to get from MLK to Hawthorne Road is going to be easier in comparison to them being located somewhere else. And that's the kind of question I'm asking in these other communities. The geographic locations impact on their actual time getting to their locations.
Absolutely it does. And as fire departments, as fire chiefs, we try to locate fire stations on what I call good run streets. You know, you want to be able to get out quickly, get on a major thoroughfare where you can move. You have multiple lanes to choose from. You don't have to run from stoplight to stoplight to stoplight, and you don't have to come out of the back of a residential subdivision twisting and turning on streets with 25-mile-an-hour speed limits. So what compounds that sometimes is those lots that we would like to have, most of the time there's a Walgreens sitting on it, and that is an expensive lot. So sometimes we are relegated to being not at on that ideal corner lot where we can turn out and be on major run streets. But I will tell you this, that relative to our peers, our primary response areas, so if you think of a fire station and its primary area, the area that it responds to primary, as a first due unit, for our peers, that area is about 5.5 square miles. For us, it's about 7.5 square miles. So it is less, in my mind, it is less that the stations are not ideally located, and more that when you look at a set geographical area, is our engines are having to go a further distance than our peers to get to the call.
And so that brought up a question that you and I discussed earlier about, is this a real estate question or is this a staffing question?
It's both. It's how long does it take to get there,
right,
and then how far do you have to travel, And then once you arrive, how many people are sitting on that fire truck?
But if your stations are closer together, you can get more trucks there.
Correct.
With people on them.
Correct. So, you know, you can attack
Seems like
this in
it's
two
approachable.
ways,
Yeah.
right? You can put more engines out there, and they have to travel a shorter distance to get where they're going, or you put more people on the engines, and when they arrive, you know, in essence, you've created the effect of needing fewer engines to handle whatever the situation is, because the people are being delivered in a greater number.
Mr. Larson, do you have a question, comment?
Well, it sort of follows up, I think, on where we're working, and we've jumped deep into the weeds here and didn't even let you finish your presentation, but let's pursue this just a little bit. If I'm reading correctly, up until 2017, we were putting 15 firefighters on site.
14. You're talking
14,
about
14 firefighters
Start one.
on site, yeah. And then and we made a switch in 2015, and we now are able to put 28 firefighters on site. Is that correct?
Well, we're actually doing 29 now.
Well, 29, and you reflect a decrease in fatalities as a result of that. The question that I'm sort of working toward is, again, I think what is sort of being skirted around here is, in order, our efficiency rating is low. Is it because our response time getting to the fire is bad compared to the number of firefighters we're getting onto site? We're getting a lot of firefighters on site. We're just not getting them there on time. And the reason we're not getting them there on time seems to be is that our fire stations, we either don't have enough of them, or they're located in the wrong position, and we don't have the option of moving them around. So then the next question is as we look at trying to spend more money, and there's no question, you know, there's a lot of needs in the fire department right now, and I totally understand that. And I think as we look ahead, whether we're building new fire stations or adding staff or whatever, that there's improvements that have to be made. We're talking about an $800,000 commitment here, plus another $500,000, 400 and something thousand a year after this grant runs out. And so as we struggle to try to figure out how to provide the best response time and the best capacity on our trucks is where I'm struggling. I would love to have, 4 people on all of our trucks. I mean, South Ward, has a very small station, and we're lucky to get 3 people on the truck. So, as I look at this, and I'm thinking about, what this grant does is put an extra rider on 5 trucks, basically, is what it's going to accomplish. Does this bring us into the compliance of the 8 minutes that we're trying to achieve as the baseline? And I know it's going to improve. I mean, I know we need this. I'm not questioning that, and I'd probably vote for it. But what I'm struggling with is how deep the hole is that we have right now in the fire department based on facility location and staffing both. And as we're looking at this, this has opened up the discussion about ultimately what our fire department really needs. And we can patch it with this for 3 or 4 years, and we can throw another $800,000 at it. But realistically, what I'm beginning to see is we have a need for another fire station, at least 1, maybe 2, if we're going to get down to that 8-minute roll that we need to. And I need to kind of understand what the bigger picture is here of overall fire department needs of staffing and of facilities that's going to allow us to meet, to get us underneath this 90%, and the 8-minute goal that is being set national standards. Do you understand where I'm going with this?
Yes, sir. And we forecasted in the grant application that the wild card for us is we don't know where the next 500 fires are going to be. But based on historical data, we estimated that our NFPA 1710 compliance would go up to about 80%. It's 56% now with the addition of these 5 people, because we did make a data-driven decision as to where these people should go to maximize the opportunity that they would arrive on the scene of working fires.
Mr. Gary,
I was going to add, the Capital Needs Committee currently is looking at the potential of what would go on a bond referendum, and included in that list, and I imagine rank fairly high, is one new fire station. The chief can give you more detail, but when you look at response times, within the city of Winston-Salem, there is an area, there's several, but the biggest area is that west area, Ebert, Burke Mill, where the chief has identified a strong need for another station, and that is on the list for the Capital Needs Committee and a bond and potential bond referendum.
And one last comment, then I'm going to be quiet. We last year worked really hard to upgrade the police department, and we increased salaries and did a variety of things. So I'm not afraid of adding additional expenses at this mid-year sort of point, committing resources to upgrade our fire protection systems. The other thing that I sort of gleaned from your charts was, most of your responses are for medical issues. You spend an incredible amount of effort pulling trucks out, full fire gear, out to handle cardiac, medical, the other thing, cats and trees, whatever they are, to deal with things that, you've got to wonder from a cost-effective perspective. And I know this goes back to your manpower issue as well. But the idea of rolling out a big fire truck for a cardiac, I wonder the effectiveness of that. And at some point we can look at smaller vehicles, more nimble, more flexible, to get our people out to address this huge responsibility that I don't think the public has any idea how often you roll the trucks out just for a cardiac or a medical emergency. And there's got to be, I would hope, maybe a better, efficient way to look at this as we look at overall functionality of both fire response and medical response. It seems to me there's something else going on here that I would like us to spend a little more time trying to understand.
Okay, I had a number of people with questions. I'll go this way, Ms. Adams and Ms. Brooks.
Yes, Councilmember Larson, no disrespect or anything. The concerns that you have about minimizing the size of the vehicles and all of that, we went through that. Councilman Montgomery Clark, Mayor Pro Tem, 5, 6 years ago? Maybe we went down that road too.
Mm-hmm.
We had this thing with the county and trying to figure out a partnership of, once they brought us all the data of how many medical calls our people were going on, we went through that. I just want to come back full circle, Mr. Chair, about why we are here discussing this. And it is because we applied for a grant without following the process. I just want everybody to keep that point first, because we wouldn't be here talking about this right now. We applied for a grant, again, that we did not follow protocol and process. Secondly, we are not going to get the Ms. Tony's report, which if anybody ever looks, well, I know you all did or will or whatever.
We will.
If you look at it, it will tell you some of the challenges we're going to have, and they're coming fast. So, again, going back to Councilmember Larson, we call ourselves trying to fix some things over the past 2 or 3 years with salary, study, looking at the areas, looking how we're losing people, not paying the people who were doing the heaviest lift. Mm-hmm. Okay? We are now into like part 2 or part 2 of the third. Where are we at, Mr. Gary? Second, third, or the third?
It's we combined it, so it's the second half.
We're on the second half.
Third half.
We get into the game, whatever. But the reason you got to keep in mind, we still have people to pay that we promised we were going to pay. We also know that we got to make some raises come January, that we got to follow through so we can get to, hopefully, 2020, $15 an hour. I'm not saying that we don't need this. I'm just saying, keep in mind, the reason why we're now talking about this is because the process was superseded by a funding.
Okay, Ms. Burke, you had your hand.
Thank you. I was going to say, from the study that we had, we spent a lot of time, especially talking about medical concerns. And I want us to go back, Mr. City Manager, so that we can see if they were followed any kind of way to follow up from the report. Now, I'm going to be voting for this. any time that I've had any of the chiefs or department heads to come in and say there's a grant available, I have supported those grants. And even in looking at those grants, Mr. City Manager, I want you to go back and look at how many grants we've received and to show me whether we have benefited from them or did we not benefit from them. And with the department as crucial, as serious as the fire department, maybe the process was not followed through properly, but I still feel that it is a need when you're talking about how long it takes a fire truck, a fireman to get to a place, and then a need for a fire station. And my conscience will be clear that I will be voting for this proposal.
Okay, Ms. Montgomery, I had you down there. Yep.
You know, when I think about locations of our fire stations, you know, where I live within 5 minutes of 3 fire stations. I can get to one on MLK, I can get one down Newark Town Road, I can get to one downtown off of Cherry within 5 minutes.
So get to one on Liberty.
Yeah, and then Liberty, and hopefully they can get to me as quickly as I can get to them. But it's the fact of other folks who live in other parts that are not as accessible. And for me, the question that I have that comes back in this two-part. One, in the grant specifically, we wrote it to put one more person on the. We wrote it specifically, put an additional person on 5 units. That's how we wrote the grant.
Yes.
And the reason I asked that question because I actually, and Councilman Adams stated it as well. We've had the conversations around emergency medical calls, around looking at rescue units of some sort within the fire department to keep from running our trucks to medical calls, and we've had the somewhat standoffs with the county and EMS around, you know, how we engage. And looking at this grant from a question of these positions and ability to use have the $800,000 to go towards creating something like that could actually potentially save us money in terms of what we use our trucks for. It's something I would actually be willing to take a look at in terms of what can actually do, and the usefulness of those individuals also being able to be agile enough to meet a fire truck at a fire to add that additional person on site. That innovation to me is something that is interesting, that says, okay, is there an opportunity in these instances to actually save by making this investment, saving money on the backside because of what we don't send a physical truck to and what that looks like and prorates over a course of an actual year. I'm not sure if that's been something that you've taken a look at. I know that was something that we looked at some time ago, but that actually is something that, for me, I'd say, hey, you know, what does that actually look like for those positions? And because the grant was written that way, I'm not sure that we can use them in any other capacity than what they stated they would grant us the funds for.
Right. So we've looked at that. But to keep the answer short, the SAFER is very specific about what the positions are to be used for. And the challenge with doing the concept you're describing is in fire department, fire service parlance, is called a quick response vehicle. And the challenge for us is we've got several. One is studies have shown it's not much cheaper, sometimes only a break-even proposition to run that unit relative to an engine. If we put people on that engine, if we put people on a QRV, the engine's got to come out of service. And most of our stations, the QRV would have to stay outside, which means drugs and other things that would be on that unit would be exposed to high and low temperatures. I'm not saying that it couldn't be done, but to just turn the switch we would not be able to do that.
Are these 5 positions designated to be supplements to the existing 4, or are they simply 15 additional firefighters being added to your staff? Are these specifically designated to be added on top of existing staffing levels of specific vehicles? You understand that? They
require you to put the positions in addition to what you're doing now.
Right.
You have to add one to each unit. So in the case of these 5 units that would now arrive on the scene with 3 people, they will be arriving on the scene with 4 people.
So these aren't what they call fungible or whatever, that you add 5 more positions and you move other people around. It has to be, you have to now create a 5-person team with these grants. That's what these are.
4-person.
Excuse me, 4-person teams
Yes,
with
sir.
these grants. That's exclusively what these are decided.
That's
And understand why he says 15, it takes 3 people to man it. Okay.
Right,
Around the clock.
three shifts, right, 3 shifts. So it's 5 per day.
Yeah.
Okay. So they're not flexible.
You know, this is something else that I really struggle with, and I mean, I know you can't put a price on safety, but we do have limited resources, and the way that this has come to us is a problem for me, because we're not looking at this in concert with an entire budget process, where there's give and take and push and pull, and I get this and you get that, and this is coming up because of an error about how it was applied for, or misinformation, or whatever. So, I mean, I understand completely the numbers and we were talking life safety, so it's a hard thing to say no to, but there is something about it that I'm struggling with in terms of how it has come to us. And you and I have spoken about that, and I have with the city manager as well.
I'll just make a few comments, and I'm looking at basically chart 2, which is the 90% travel time for 15 firefighters. Knowing where I live on a Sunday morning, and I'm only going to go with 4 trucks. I'm not even worried about the 5th one. There's no way that 4th truck could get to my house within 10 or 12 minutes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely could.
I mean, you think it could?
Yes, sir. Country Club in Jonestown,
Yeah.
Arbor and Country Club,
Yeah.
and 2 coming to you off of Peace Haven and Robin Hood.
I don't think Peace Haven and Robin Hood could get to me in 11 minutes. But certainly not get there in 5 minutes and 35 seconds, because that's what they'd have to do to
Remember, that's 5 minutes and 35 seconds on the road, running emergency traffic on a Sunday morning.
Yeah. I drive it all the time. I don't think, well, of course, I'm not driving with a siren on. But anyway, what I struggle with, and I do have an issue with the way this off-cycle, but I'm wondering what the problem is, and therefore what is the solution. And I think Mr. McIntosh said it very well. Is this a manning issue or is this a real estate issue? And I'm just thinking we need more. Greensburg's got to have a lot more stations than we have, and I don't see that information. They've got to have a lot more stations.
They have more stations, and they have about 65 more people working every day than we do.
Yeah. And I will say, and it's not in here because we certainly didn't ask for it, but if you look at the density of Winston-Salem, that is the number of residents per square mile, it is very, very low. We are very much of a sprawling city. If you look at the number of citizens we have per acre or per square mile, it is very low. And there, as you say, you've got to cover a lot more acreage than other fire departments, just simply because that's the way we are. I did read the capital plan and noticed in there is a fire station planned kind of in the greater Haynes Mall area, Griffith Road type area. And maybe potentially, and there was another one in there, we were going to buy some land behind it so we could bring the trucks in easier. I don't remember where that is. But it, again, if we want to get 4 trucks anywhere in 11 minutes, I just see this is a real estate issue to me, and that's what I'm struggling with. And the number of stations we would have to add would be unbelievable. And I will measure from my house to where you and I met the other day, and that's got to be 7 or 8 miles.
Run your lights and sirens.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Finally not.
But anyway.
Mr. Chairman, can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
So if you look at chart 2, our current performance right now is 11 minutes, 24 seconds. Yeah. That's 15 people. That's at the 90th percentile. So 9 times out of 10, we're doing it right now in 11 minutes and 24 seconds. Yeah,
but what do we want it to be?
8. The standard is 8.
Yeah.
And you see what the effect there is. You know, we cut 1.5 minutes off of it approximately.
Yeah. By
adding 5 people. 1.5 minutes is a big deal in our business. If it's your house on fire, you're not breathing 1.5 minutes. You want them. You want all 90 seconds of them.
Yeah. Well, you're the expert. To me, another thing would be critical is when does the first truck get there, right? Not the last truck. My neighbor had they had a kitchen fire that, and of course, the station's right down Country Club, it was there probably in 2 minutes.
7 minutes and 54 seconds, 90% of the time. That's total response time for the first arriving unit.
7 minutes.
That's total response time from the time the phone rings in the 911 center until that fire truck's sitting in front of your house. 7 minutes, 54 seconds, 90% of the time.
And Greensboro can get 4 trucks there in less time than we can get 1.
Yeah.
If who
We don't
has
want to do
four.
Greensboro.
Right, yeah. Unless there is an imminent and obvious threat to life, we can't mount an interior attack with less than 4 people. That's an OSHA violation.
Okay. What I'm saying is, Greensboro gets 4 trucks there quicker than we get 1 truck.
That's traveling. What you're seeing here is travel time, because NFPA 1710 is only talking about travel time. So Greensboro does it, fits 15 people in 5 minutes, 35 seconds, traveling. The 7:54 I gave you for us, that's total response time.
Well,
From
even if you took a minute off to roll or whatever, they're still getting 4 trucks there about the same amount of time.
it takes us about 3 minutes to process the call and start the fire truck moving.
All right. Mr. Larson, you said you were going to say any more, but I'll recognize you again. And let me say,
yeah.
we're not going to get to the next item, so come back. Yes.
The fire department's in need. Even if we were to add fire stations, we do not have the staff to man them. Sooner or later, we're going to have to invest in the fire department. So the question is when. I respect my colleagues in the sense of the way this grant was prepared. Certainly, it hits us blindsided. There's a cost that you will pay for that eventually. It may be in the capital campaign.
Feel like I paid for it in the last.
Yeah, unquestionably there will be, because sooner or later the budgets have got to balance. But the problem that I'm seeing is that we don't have the fire stations and we don't have the full staffing that we need. And sooner or later we've got to start addressing that. Whether this is the first step to do that or not is sort of where I am on this. I would like to see a new fire station, but we don't have the staff to man it, and who knows what that's going to cost us. Sooner or later, we've got to get some capacity in our fire department. We've been working on our police and other responders. So, it's regrettable the way this grant was submitted. It's regrettable that we are going to have to do things that we didn't have to do 2 years ago in the sense of matching this thing. But sooner or later, it is a start. It is money. It is real money. It gets us in the door, and it allows us to begin to do something that we're going to eventually have to do anyway. So that's where I am.
The other committee, go ahead, Ms. Burke.
No, we could be here all night.
I was going to say, the other committee is going to look at it in a minute. What does this committee, and I've got 4 members here and 3 guests.
I've already said I'm voting for it. So.
Well, I will just ask, does anyone want to make a motion, and is there a second? We can vote on it.
Well, I think, Chief, I have confidence. I don't believe it may not have done it the way that some wanted it, but you as a fire chief, I see you as a dedicated person, and you have done your work well. So I support it, and I say again, the safety and welfare is so important for me. So I'm going to make a motion for this.
To approve it, okay. If there's a second, we'll vote. If not, we'll see. Is there a second? Motion dies for lack of a second. I suggest we hold it in committee, and public safety will address it in 5 minutes.
Yes.
Can public safety forward it to full council? I'd like to hear a full council conversation on it as much as I don't.
Okay, we're not going to do anything. We're going to let the other committee handle it.
Thank you.
And their meeting, I have not seen Mr. Taylor. Normally he walks in about now. But anyway, I'm assuming they're going to start in about 5 minutes. With that, we are adjourned. And I apologize for